At all times, tracks, trail and highways served humanity as keys to evolution. Empires and civilizations disappeared, centuries-old dust swept capitals and cities, but roads kept on breathing life back into them. Do we really understand how roads revitalized areas hundreds of years ago and how they affect people's destinies today? We go on the Treasures of the Nation expedition to reveal facts about life at the crossroads of antiquity. Modern motorways are very much new, but if a trail is left, it will surely be found even thousands of years later. In this episode, how can a nomad take place on a captain's bridge? Who are the Yuryuks? Can steppe fighting tactics ensure victory in naval combat? Life is a road, an ever-changing landscape behind the window of a rushing car. The farther from home, the more changes there are. How did our ancestors change going farther and farther away from their homes, paving their way into the unknown? How did they alter the world around them? Investigating life metamorphosis, the Treasures of the Nation expedition came to Turkey. Why Turkey? In recent years, we got used to perceiving this country as a shopping and vacation paradise. The truth is that, first of all, this country is a paradise for history fans. This is where they found the legendary Troy. This is where the first ever Christian temple was built. The first university was built also here. We naturally are first of all interested in the fact that this country was established by the nomads of the Great Steppe. By now, they have changed beyond recognition, and we are very much keen to learn how this shift took place. The name of the territory of modern-day Turkey, also known as Anatolia, from the most ancient time, it was penetrated by the nomads of the Great Steppe. However, the most large-scale, legendary and epic invasion that altered these ends completely was the invasion of the Central Asian nomads called the Oghuz that laid the foundation for the centuries-long rule of the Seljuk Turks.
9. ve 11. yüzyıllar arasında
the nomad military invasion starts in the 9th, 11th centuries. Descendants of Oghuz Khan, Gül Khan, Taha Khan, Yıldız Khan and Aydin Khan begin to settle in Anatolia. We established that Gül Khan from the kin of Kayı-Boyi and Yertuğrul moved to Anatolia from the Altai Mountains. We see the progression of the skin from Beydom over separate kins to the creation of the actual Ottoman Empire here. How did they interact? What mutual influence between the nomads and the settled tribes took place? Interaction and mutual influence, of course, took place, but the Turkic tribes maintained features of their own culture. For instance, Turkic warriors were always attributed with outstanding combat qualities, and therefore were always engaged in military service. On the contrary, the southeast regions of Turkey, where nomads had moved initially, are still known for their livestock production traditions. Central Asian Turks also significantly affected the Turkish interior. With the arrival of nomads to Anatolia, their way of decorating yurts became a new local fashion of adorning guest houses or chandiras. Up to the present, in Turkey they decorate the walls of guest rooms with carpets and weaponry based on the nomadic custom.
Дворец Долма-Бахчи.
The Palace of Dolmabahce. Once exactly here on the coast of the Bosphorus Strait, the mighty Turkish fleet was based. This place became the last nest of the dying away Ottoman Empire, but it was also the place where the new Turkey was born. That was the time when the legendary Atatürk governed it. Our next stop is the Istanbul Makala of the culture of Turkic people. In fact, it is a whole park of Turkic culture consisting of houses decorated with the flags of Turkic states, holding expositions devoted to the culture of each Turkic people. Having found ourselves near the Dia Kazak yurt, the expedition members felt themselves truly at home. It was here where they were destined to meet a rather interesting interlocutor. So we are about to meet the last nomads of Turkey. Meanwhile, let's listen to the expert that has investigated the subject for quite some time. Hello, nice to meet you. We were told that in the south of Turkey there still live the last nomads. Is it true?
Doğru.
Yes, it is. In the south of Anatolia region, there live the people which we call the Yuryuk. The word originates from the cognate word of yuremek, meaning to walk or to go. They are engaged in livestock production and migrate to different locations depending on the season. Where did they come from? What is the history of the Yuryuk? Yuryuk is a synonym of Turk. Yuryuk is a Turk per se. During the formation of the Seljuk and Ottoman empires, the representatives of 24 Oguzkins stood at the origins of our statehood. Thus, the Yuryuk are the foundation of the Turkic nation. Could you name a couple of famous Yuryuks? Among the famous persons, there are many Yuryuks. Mustafa Kemal Atatürk is probably by far the brightest representative of the Yuryuk. Yes, yes, he himself often said that he was of the Yuryuk kin. When the obsolete Ottoman Empire not only lost practically all its former gains, when the independence of the Turkic people inhabiting Anatolia itself was under question, a young and vigorous officer, Kemal Mustafa Atatürk, came to the political arena. During World War I, among his other multiple brilliant combat operations, he was the one that expelled the Greek invaders from Turkey and stopped the advancement of the Entente troops. Later, having completely seized the political power in the country, Atatürk established Turkey as a secular state and basically reoriented the country towards the highly developed Europe. Amazingly, even the father of the Turkic nation is of Yuryuk descent. The more interesting it is to meet them at last. The treasures of the nation expedition is departing to southern Turkey. We are in Istanbul's Atatürk airport getting ready to fly to Antalya. We know this city as a resort, but in fact it is exactly the place where the history of Turkic tribes settling in Anatolia began, with the 24 Oguzkins arriving there in the 13th century. Wandering along the streets of ancient Antalya, it is hard to fight the desire to shoot an exotic movie. All because here, more than 3,000 houses, even antique ones, are still standing. They are of absolutely different styles: Hellenic, Roman, Byzantine, Seljuk, Ottoman, you name it. The mix of styles creates an unforgettable bright feeling of aesthetic pleasure.
Яркого эстетического наслаждения.
Somewhere in the suburbs of Antalya there finds itself Mustafa Kuş's Yuryuks Cultural Center. At full speed, the expedition was heading there but couldn't pass by a flamboyant old woman. It turned out that Katla teyze, this is how they address senior women in Turkey, is also a Yuryuk. And as we know, the Yuryuk are recognized cattle breeders. We have been engaged in cattle breeding for a long time now. We sell it during religious holidays. We collect hay and straw for winter season, take care of cattle offspring, and take our animals to pastures in summertime. This is what we do. In olden days, it took us 7 to 10 days to reach summer pastures. While there, we women were generally engaged in dairy production, and in the fall, we did goat shearing. It is pleasant to recall them, but it's impossible to bring them back. Based on her story, the local Yuryuks stopped migrating about 20 years ago. My generation is already old. Recently, tourism developed in our ends, and the youth started working in hotels. There is nobody to graze the cattle. We had to sell almost all of it. And although we are already too old for this, we still keep cattle as a hobby, because we simply like it. Bitterly sighing about the past, Katla teyze invited us to her house to treat travelers with traditional dishes according to the old Yuryuk hospitality custom. The expedition left Grandma Katla and went to talk to the leader of local Yuryuks, Mustafa Kuş, and pose a difficult question. How come the Yuryuk that diligently served the state, not to mention that they actually founded it, nowadays fell out of the loop and the nomadic culture disappeared in Turkey today? The Yuryuk are real children of the nature and therefore very much love and protect it. Since ancient time, they engaged in livestock production. Our nomadic ancestors invented multiple natural meat and milk foods and dishes. For example, yogurt, now popular all over the world. So the Yuryuk not just created this state and protected it up in arms, but also significantly contributed to its economic development. The Yuryuk were not only good soldiers, but also worked as carriers and food suppliers during wars. However, already at the time of the Ottoman Empire, the Yuryuk started to suffer from the state. In those days, the empire didn't need migrating warriors anymore. It needed taxes and soldiers, and thus the nomads were violently forced to settle. Often state officials rushed into their camps and cut the ropes holding chadiras or Yuryuk yurts. Those who opposed were exiled to islands. This attitude towards the Yuryuk remained up until the mid-20th century and no doubt impacted the nature and the people. Because the state tried to transfer the primordial nomads to a settled life model, certain adverse natural phenomena occurred. Human relations got worse also. Destruction of cultural and moral values was setting on, because in nature, everything is interconnected. In spite of all that, the Yuryuks supported and respected the state. They continued to loyally serve the country created by their ancestors. In some areas, they managed to keep to nomadic life until in the second half of the 20th century, a new trouble came: industrial development and the mass media. Financial pressures fell on the nomads, and for the main part, the public perceived their way of life as primitive and retrogressive. I myself led the nomadic way of life until 1956. Over time, alien businessmen bought out the land in our area and partitioned off migration paths. In 2011-2012, there were only 300 to 500 migrating Yuryuk families in the whole country. They suffer from constant pressure on behalf of the government, which interferes in their migrations. Sometimes they just block the roads. The story of Mustafa Bey was shocking, but strangely enough, not surprising. The history of Kazakhstan is full of similar things. It became obvious that the nomads around the world share a common fate. During the same time, the suppression of nomadic civilization also started in certain parts of the Great Steppe. and by the 20th century, the true nomads disappeared altogether. Despite the challenges, the Yuryuk don't despond and aren't giving up. The cultural center founded by Mustafa Kush speaks exactly of that. Here the Yuryuk meet and hold mass celebrations. There is also a real Yuryuk culture museum. The leader of the Yuryuk community himself is full of optimism. In due time, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk said, "Distinguished Beys, go to the Taros Mountains, and if you see at least one Yuryuk youth there, then you should know that no force will defeat or destroy us. Here, near the Taros Mountains, you see our Chadiras, which means that we're still sure of our force. The Yuryuk are nomads, the Yuryuk are Turks, and thus, the Yuryuk constitute the irremissible basis of our state." We do have a museum with about 2,000 exhibits, traditional Yuryuk household items. In my opinion, the most precious ones are the besik, the baby cradle, silbich, the baby tube for urine emission, kimen, the spindle, hay bell, the bazaar bag, and some others. All these things that our grandfathers use in their everyday life are also present in your Kazakh culture. The rather rich museum exposition was created on a voluntary basis. We can see a lot of familiar things, beginning with these chests here. About 20 years ago, they were present in almost every Kazakh home. Or say this kamcha, an absolutely recognizable attribute of every Kazakh shepherd. This bag also that they throw over shoulder or hang over horseback. Quite many objects of Yuryuk culture are virtually identical with their Kazakh versions. Unfortunately, the majority of them can be seen only in museums today. Let me say a couple of parting words to you. Maintain and preserve your culture, because a people without culture loses itself and its values. Our museum is the only designated Yuryuk museum in Turkey. Having met one more Yuryuk, Serdar Kirkpınar, we got even more convinced that the Yuryuk, despite the difficulties, do continue to keep to their traditions and appreciate their ancestors. He invited us to visit another Yuryuk center, the city of Alanya. It turned out that in Alanya there lives and prospers the musical art of the Yuryuk, and many musical instruments either physically resemble the Kazakh ones or have similar names. But it was not all. Serdar Bey told us about one more quite unexpected metamorphosis that happened to the Yuryuk in addition to their transition to settled life. This chapter of the Yuryuk history was no less glorious than the previous, steppe one. Sultan Adin Keykubad, the Sultan of Two Seas, left a shipyard here. We could go there to see it with our own eyes if you want to. What? A shipyard? A facility to build ships created by steppe nomads? It's really hard to wrap one's head around that. Of course, the expedition members wanted to visit it, but Serdar had another surprise in stock for us. Great Yuryuk heroes are numerous. Among them, Hayrettin Barbarossa Pasha, also a Yuryuk Turk, takes a special place. He was a famous seaman, chief admiral and captain. Hayrettin Barbarossa and his elder brother Aruj were the legendary pirates of the Mediterranean Sea, the terror of Spain and all southern Europe. He was extremely brave and could think outside the box. By the way, it was this Turkish pirate that became the prototype of Hector Barbarossa, one of the main characters of the well-known Hollywood movie The Pirates of the Caribbean. We will give you more details about this legendary Yuryuk corsair later. Meanwhile, let's fulfill the boyhood dreams of the sea, fortresses and ships.
В 1227
In 1227, the Seljuk arrived on this coast of the Mediterranean headed by Sultan Al-Din Keykubat. First, he rebuilt the city, enhanced the fortifications, and most importantly established the shipyards to build vehicles of the sea. This is the place where the marine epic of the nomads of the Great Steppe began.
кочевников Великой Степи.
But how could such a change take place? How could the steppe nomads become skillful seamen never seen the sea before?
Sevgili Erman, Türkler ordu millettir.
Turkic people possess statehood thinking of an imperial scale. Therefore, such an outstanding figure as Sultan Al-Din Keykubat, before seizing the area, got ready for everything in advance. Prior to storming the fortress, he had gathered dozens of instructors with him who, after the conquest, trained his troops in seamanship in an expedited manner. In addition to seamen, Sultan Keykubat brought with him many scientists and handicraftsmen skillful in seamanship from Iran and other countries. Thanks to that, he quickly built the shipyards and created a navy powerful for those times. He did the same with another aquatic zone after conquering the city of Sinop on the southern coast of the Black Sea. From there, he managed to control even the Crimean Peninsula, and that's why they called him the Sultan of Two Seas. These shipyards in Sinop and Alanya operated for a very long time and produced warships during Seljuk and Ottoman time. Much later, when the steamships appeared, they started using the shipyards to repair merchant ships and small fishing boats. This is to say that this very shipyard operated for nearly 700 years, servicing the navy of the state established by the nomads and ensuring its victories across the whole Mediterranean Sea up to Gibraltar. Alanya is indeed full of surprises. We wish we could stay here longer, but in order to fly back to Istanbul, the expedition returned to Antalya, where we had a wonderful promenade along the embankment, enjoying the sea and the view of fortresses and ships.
Анталия – это могучие крепости.
Antalya is comprised of several mighty fortresses surrounded by hundreds of sea schooners. Exactly here, the dry land journey of the ancient steppe heroes was over, and their new story of the old salts began.
Морских волков.
Shaken by the wonderful nomads' transformation into seamen, the expedition team went back to Istanbul to learn more about the legend of the nomads' sea glory, Hayrettin Barbarossa. Having learned that a filming crew from Kazakhstan is working in the country, they invited us to the research fund of the Turkic world, where the international Turkic staff is working and which hosts a great collection representing all Turkic nations. At that particular time, Professor Özkul Kobanoglu of Hacettepe University was also there. For many years, he has been studying the Barbarossa's phenomenon and agreed to tell us about him. According to Professor Kobanoglu, since the time of Turkic people came to Anatolia from the Great Steppe, their transition from nomadic life to seamanship was a forced, lengthy and difficult process. So we came from the steppe, and after having taken over Anatolia, other people would come here and attack us from the sea. One has to ensure his own safety, right? So whether we wanted it or not, in our case we had to begin studying navigation. Over time, Turkic people occupied the coastal islands discovered earlier by the nomads. They created their families, had children, adapted to local climate, got accustomed to local culture and cuisine. Having descended from the Altai Mountains and reached Anatolia thanks to their nomadic way of life, Turkic people turned into seamen and gave birth to many great mariners.
Ну а чем отличились?
Did they distinguish themselves at sea? Having conquered and spread around Anatolia, the Seljuk Turks began to study navigation, and in the 12th century Çakırbey Bey established a khanate in Izmir that included the islands of Lesbos, Sakız and some others. That combination led to the phenomenon of merger between the Turkic and the Mediterranean cultures. Hayrettin Barbarossa was born on one of the Mediterranean islands developed by the alien nomads to an ordinary family. Together with his brothers, he engaged in trade until the moment when the most senior of them, Iskak, was captured by crusaders that requested a huge ransom. To earn this money and to save Iskak, his younger brothers Hayrettin, Kızı and Oruç engaged in piracy. After liberating Iskak from captivity, the brothers continued to pirate. They even took over a fortress in Tunisia and thereby all Tunisia, and after that Algeria submitted to them. In Algeria, Hayrettin Barbarossa established an independent kingdom. In Europe they even called him the King of Algeria, but he actually voluntarily gave away his crown to Sultan Kanuni Suleiman and remained his subordinate. And what in Barbarossa's actions reminds of nomad tactics? What steppe combat techniques he adapted for marine warfare? In 1538, in Preveza, Hayrettin Pasha, for the first time in the history of marine combat, used the well-known nomadic tactics of strong wings and weak center, or surrounding an opponent from flanks and then destroying him. Using this and many other nomad techniques in marine combat, Barbarossa took control of practically the whole of the Mediterranean. What about the status of Barbarossa's name in today's Turkey? Do the Turks honor him? In Turkish seamanship, Barbarossa is considered one of the most prominent figures and is esteemed as a great admiral. In schools and lyceums, they have a separate course on the history of the Ottoman Empire that includes Barbarossa's biography. We can even say that we have the Barbarossa Pasha's cult. The cult's capital is located in his mausoleum in Beşiktaş, where they hold annual parades and memory marches. Turkish Navy and other state organizations hold mandatory events to commemorate the legendary admiral. In addition to official events, Turkish mariners have a certain tradition honoring Barbarossa and other great admirals. In the sea, there are memorable places associated with the great victories of the Turkish fleet. Passing through these locations, Turkish warships fire a volley from 3 guns, commercial ships do it by signaling their pipes. Barbarossa's phenomenon is very interesting not only from the point of view of studying the past, but also for the future. I teach our businessmen his methods of unconventional thinking. I always try to cite him as an example to the young generation. I tell them about how the nomads learned navigation and became the glorified seamen. Even today we have to explain to our children who Barbarossa was, because some of his tactics can be used even in space.
Покидая Турцию, мы решили почтить.
Prior to leaving Turkey, we decided to pay tribute to the great corsair Hayrettin Barbarossa. What does his destiny tell us? Perhaps that life is ever-changing and that the steppe centaurs have every chance of becoming the sea wolves.
Да, прибывшие сюда в
Indeed, the nomads that once arrived in the Mediterranean, those steppe horse riders, changed their way of life but never betrayed their nomadic legacy. They remain free, strong and sharp. Remember Barbarossa, change as the life goes on, but remain true to yourself.